So today we are going to start with struts, and these are the points which we have to cover related to struts framework. Okay, so we'll firstly go for the overview what exactly struts is. So as I told, struts is a framework which we generally use for uh, web application development in Java. Okay, and obviously being a framework, we can cover up the entire development cycle right from building to the deployment, and after the deployment even the maintenance of those applications we can perform using the framework constructs which are provided. Okay, to discuss a few features at the beginning. So the first one is configurable MVC components. So basically, uh, if you break up the entire struts framework, so you have a model, I mean, where you will write the Java classes, action Java classes. Then you have the view, that is your JSP pages, on which you may be accepting the inputs from the user, and on which you will be displaying the response coming from the server to the user. So that is the view part. Uh, as far as the controller is concerned, so we are only concerned about the various XML files which act as controllers in case of struts. So we'll see what the role of those XML files is. But whether it is a view component or it is action class, whatever components are there, all of those components can be configured using the struts.xml file, right? For example, when we create any dynamic web project in Eclipse or any other IDE, we get the web.xml file, right? And components of the web.xml file we can configure accordingly. Our web application is configured, right? Similarly, we have a struts.xml file for struts framework web applications, and we can configure our web applications using that XML file. Okay, what are those files? We'll see in detail further. Okay, then after that, POJO, that is plain old Java object, that is abbreviated as POJO. So all the strut action classes. So what is an action class in strut? Simply, if you remember, we created a form, and in that we had an action attribute for the form, right? So for that action attribute, we need to mention either a PHP or a servlet class name, right? That is what we used to do. So now that functionality is shifted, and we write a separate action class, and then for that action class, uh, I mean, we mention the name of the action class uh, in the as a value for the action attribute in the form. Okay, not exactly that, but for now we can assume that we are mentioning the name of the action class in the action attribute of our form. In case of strut web applications, we do that. Okay, so that action class performs all the activities. I mean, it will compute some data for you, and then it passes that data, whatever data is generated, that data is passed to the view component. I mean, to the JSP page or the HTML page, which we have to send as a response to the user, right? So it is just a pure computational class that is called as the action class. Now that action class is a simple Java class, plain old Java class. And we have two choices. Either we can implement it directly without inheriting or implementing any of the classes or interfaces, or we can we can implement the uh, action support interface, right? That is why in that whatever inbuilt interface methods are there, we need to define those methods since we are implementing action support interface. So we have two choices, but it is not mandatory to implement any of the interfaces or inherit any other class in order to implement our own action class. Okay, we can straight away write the execute method in our own action class, and we can have our own uh, we can have the model part of our strut application ready. Okay, then Struts by default supports the Ajax technology, and obviously Ajax will make some asynchronous requests to the server, to the server side, and it will fetch the data without reloading the entire page. Only the required section of your page is updated with the fetched data from the server side, right? So another thing is that we can only submit only the required fields to the server and not the entire form. Right? That affects the performance altogether. So it has an inbuilt support for Ajax requests. Secondly, it can integrate, any of the Strut application can integrate with other frameworks like Hibernate, Spring, which are Java oriented, right? So it has an integration support for all those frameworks also. As far as the view part is concerned, that means we have to show the result. So the view part can be developed either using JSP or the free marker technology or velocity technology. So a number of uh, viewing technologies are supported by Strut2 web applications. Right? Coming to the tags which are supported, so all the UI tags, control tags, data tags, uh, which are essential in order to develop the applications rapidly and to make dynamic changes to the applications. All of those tag types are supported by Strut applications. Then as far as the look and feel is concerned, so there are three types of themes which are supported by Strut applications. Number one is simple HTML. Number two is XML, which is again combination of XHTML, which is combination of XML and HTML, and further CSS XHTML is also supported. But by default, if you don't configure the strut.xml file, then by default the theme and template which is used by Strut applications, it is the XML XHTML theme and template. Okay, so remember all these things as far as the objectives is concerned, the default settings and what all technologies and tags, whatever is supported by Strut objectives may be asked on this. Okay, fine. Okay, let us move on to the architecture followed by Strut. So again, as I told, Strut framework is built upon the model, view, and controller uh, architecture, and we will have to define some action classes and some viewing components, may it be the index.jsp page, may it be the result page, whatever it is. So we'll have to design and define all those classes and pages, and we can mention them inside the strut.xml file. Okay, so in short, if we analyze, any strut application is going to have these five components. An action, as I told, there will be some action class. There will be interceptors, right, which are supplementary to the action class. Like before we are submitting the form data directly to the action class, what pre-processing is required, that is performed by interceptors, and what post-processing is also required, that is to performed by the interceptors. Okay, so and additional functionality, if you have anything like file uploading and all, that can be performed with the interceptors. Okay, so these are the five components. We'll discuss them one by one in detail. Prior to that, this is the architecture diagram of Struts framework. So any user request which is coming from the client browser will be submitted to the controller. Now there will be a dispatcher filter which will decide which of the action classes is to be uh, which of the action classes should handle this request. So dispatcher filter will perform that task. Again, if any interceptor is required for pre-processing the data which is coming from the user, any of the interceptors will be used. Then the actual action class will be invoked. uh, the proper data will be computed, and then finally we are going to submit the data back to the view through the controller, and where either whatever viewing technology we are using, whether it is JSP, free marker, whatever it is, using that technology we are reproducing the result onto the client browser. Now, in order to do this, we will have to, there are some setter and getter methods which are involved. Again, those methods are defined inside the action class. And one of the common methods which is required, uh, it is mandatorily required in the action class, it is the execute method. Okay, we'll see what exactly the execute and set and get methods are like. Okay, so the life cycle of any user request will be as follows. The user will be requesting any resource to the server, right? For generally web pages are requested for. Then, as I told, the dispatcher filter uh, looks at the request and will determine what action is to be performed, uh, whatever is the request. Depending upon that, the action class will be decided. Then if any interceptor is to be applied to perform functionalities, as I told, any file uploading or any validation is to be performed before the data is submitted to the action class, then that is done by the interceptor. Then the selected action class will be executed based upon the requested operation. And finally, if any post processing is to be done on the result which is generated by the action class, then again that is performed by the interceptor. Okay, and finally, the view component will prepare the result and return that result to the client, the client browser. Okay, so this is the life cycle of Struts application for the user request which is generated for any Struts web application. Okay, yeah. So in order to create any Struts web application, as I told, we have to deal with these four major components. So we'll see one by one about them. So we'll see about them when we are talking in context of creating a Struts web application. So in order to do that, we'll have to create a dynamic web project, name it whatever we want. Here we are naming it as Hello World Struts 2, right? So after that, we will have to uh, at the last step, we will have to check the web.xml uh, deployment descriptor. Like we have to tick that option, and then uh, by clicking on finish, we get the project ready. Yeah, it is created. Then a few jar files listed over here are required to be loaded in the lib folder. Uh, so in your project library folder, you will have to import or you will have to add all these jar files. Okay. Next, we will have to create firstly the action class, as I told. So either firstly talking about the name of the action class, if you are extending or if you are implementing any action support interface, then uh, you can have any name for the action class. But it is better that if you are not implementing or if you are not inheriting from any other inbuilt action class, then your class name should always have the word action at the end. Whatever the class name is, it should be appended with the action word. Okay, so remember this thing. Okay, so here we are not extending anything or we are not implementing any action support interface. So a plain Java class is created over here. We are having a member, data member as name, and this is the mandatory function, right? Remember that from the objective point of view also, it is important that none of the, I mean, if we are writing a execute function, which is mandatorily required in any action class, then none of the execute functions will have a argument. It will never have a argument. Okay, and it will always return something. This is mandatory. Okay, now whatever it returns, uh, so we are returning success string from here, right? And obviously the appropriate signature is there that the function should be public, the function should return some string, and it should have no argument in the argument list. So these are the basic traits of any execute function of action class. Fine. To get the name, I mean, whenever the result will be prepared by the view component, it will require some data from the action class, isn't it? In order to prepare the output page, the view component will require some data from the action class, right? So that data is fetched by using this getter function. So here we have the get name function and which will return the name. Fine. Similarly, whenever the data is submitted to the action class, I mean from the form it is submitted obviously, then automatically the setter function will use that data to initialize the data member of the action class. So that is the setter function of the action class. Okay, remember these things. The number of data members you have, the number of getter and setter functions you will have in the action class. Okay, fine. Now, what is the use of execute function? Whatever processing part is to be included, that you can put up inside the execute function. Remember this. So whatever data processing is to be done, that will be performed inside the execute function. Okay, fine. So after creating the project, after including all the jar files in the lib folder, we will firstly create the action class and we will define the methods of the action class. Right? Then we will have to prepare the view now. That means we will have to prepare the both the pages, the input page and the output page. So all of those comes under the view. So firstly, we'll see how the output page will look like. So the output page will definitely be a .jsp file. Okay, because uh, we are going to import some data into this page from our action class, right? So it has to be a JSP file. Okay, so we'll create a .jsp page. Then very important to note over here is we have used the taglib directive over here, and we are from this taglib directive, what we are trying to use, we are trying to use some tag library, and which is struts tab library. Okay, we'll give the proper URL since we have installed or we have the struts framework, so we'll give the proper URL over here. Okay. Next, we need to prefix some I mean a set of characters or a single character to the strut tags. Okay, so here you can see here below when we are using the property tag. So this property tag is a strut tag. So in order to identify it as a strut tag, we will have to write some prefix string, and that prefix string is defined over here, whether it is S, A, B, C, whatever it is. So that prefix string must be used ahead of all the strut tags, whatever we use in designing this JSP page. Okay, remember this thing. So definitely after doing that, what we are displaying over here is whatever name will be entered by the user in one of the input fields, that name will be passed to the action class, right? And then once that name is assigned to the data member name through the setter function, then by using the getter function correspondingly we can fetch the name over here. Now in order to fetch uh, any property, we use the property tag in the JSP page over here, and whichever property we want to fetch, the name of that property is to be mentioned over here. Okay, so where this name is given, obviously when we wrote the input form, the name field is there, right? So that name we are using over here. Understood? It is not at all required that your data member name and the name which you are using over here should be the same, right? Okay, so hello something would be printed as the output from the struts application. Okay, so that is one thing. Next, ahead of this, we will have to create the main page. That means our index.jsp file, obviously, which will be loaded first when the strut web application is run, right? So what that should be, it is a simple uh, HTML document which is going to have a form, and definitely that form will have some input field, and the name which we have provided over here, as you can see, should be the same which we are using in the output field. Understood? So that should be noted. Anything else? Yeah, another thing, since if at all we are using a strut tag in designing this page, so for those strut tags also we will have to include the tag lib directive. Okay, the same drill, no change in that. And once the data from this form is submitted, the appropriate action function, action class will get executed, and then the result will be generated. So this is the flow for strut web applications. Okay. Now that was about the code, right? But moving ahead, we need to configure the strut.xml file, struts.xml file, right? So in that, if you observe over here, uh, these uh, constant tag, whatever we have, firstly, being a struts.xml file, the root element of this file will always be struts. Then these two elements, constant and package, these are mandatory and they should be written always, right? Since we are creating this struts.xml file for one of the projects, right? So we are naming that project as a part of this package, hello world package. Okay. Then this is where we want to concentrate, the action tag. Okay. So as I told, whatever form you are writing, let me go back to the previous page. So here below you can see we wrote the form, and in the action field we wrote hello. So what generally we wrote over here, name of the servlet or name of the JSP page or name of the PHP page to which this form data is to be submitted, right? That is what we wrote over here. But now in Struts application, what we write the name of action tag, whatever we gave over here. So the action tag over here is having the name hello, and that is why we are writing here hello. Understood? So the number of action classes we will have in our Struts web application, those many action tags will come inside the struts.xml file. Remember this. Okay. Now talking about this particular action, that is hello action, which class is representing that action? So we'll have to define the entire, uh, I mean, the package name, sub package name, and then the class name. This example, as I took it directly from tutorials point, so the URL or the packages is com.tutorials.struts2. The class name. Understood? So hello world action was our class name, as you can see over here, right? So that is the class name followed by the method which we want to call. So it is the execute method which we want to call. Understood? And for every action, we need to have some resultant page that will be displayed to the client. So that resultant page is again defined by using the result tag, right? Now, for every action class, there may be n number of, types of result. One is the success page, one is the invalid data page, one is the unsuccessful page, right? So for each of those types of results, we will have to define a separate JSP page. Now for the success message, we have designed the hello world.jsp page, the one that we designed over here, right? This one, hello world.jsp. The same URL we are mentioning in the pair of result tags, and then we close the action. Again, if we have more than one action class, we can have more than one action tags inside the struts.xml. Clear? Be very clear about what all components we have in the struts.xml file. This is important. Okay, so this was the struts.xml configuration file. Since it is a web application, so obviously any web application, may it be a plain web application or it may be a framework web application, it will mandatorily have a web.xml file, and any strut web application will also have a web.xml file. So what we write, generally we mention the entry point to the strut application, right? So here you can see uh, we are using the file dispatcher, if you remember the architecture diagram. So as a filter class tag, we'll have to specify which dispatcher we are using. So generally we use the filter dispatcher, right? And apart from that, we will have to specify the welcome file list, right? So index.jsp, whatever was our form, right? This form. So index.jsp is our welcome file. So all those things we have to specify inside the web.xml. Okay. Yeah, this is what the application will look like. So you have a input field and a button. Whatever we put in the input field, press the button. The output page will append that string with the hello world string. That's all. Okay, so this was a simple hello world example using